Good morning, guys. Thank you for joining us today. I'll just give it a few more minutes while we see people dialing in, and we'll get started shortly. Okay, I'll give it a few more minutes and see people dialing in. Okay, awesome. We'll get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Cisco Certification Changes. My name is Michelle, and I'm a marketing leader here at DDLS, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly run through some housekeeping. This webinar is in listen mode only and will be recorded and distributed to all attendees at a later date. This webinar will run for approximately 45 minutes. There will then be Q&A session at the very end. If you have any questions, please type them into the question box on the control panel. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Michael Clark, our Product Portfolio Manager. I'd now like to hand it over to Michael.
Good morning, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Understand you've probably all had, like myself and everyone else, a pretty chaotic week. And I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and listen to me waffle on about Cisco certifications. So I'll try and maximise our time here today. It won't be too long. The total presentation should run for about no more than probably 30 minutes. And then after that, we can have some question and answers, because I'm sure you'll have some as well. And as Michelle already mentioned, we will be recording the presentation. So the topics I want to talk about today, so I'm just going to, just bear with me, is first we're going to talk about why Cisco have changed and decided to change the certification stream. We're going to touch in a little bit on the different sets, being CCNA and then of course the CCNP, and then we're going to delve into a little bit deeper into this particular certification streams of those new set of the new program. We're also going to talk about and show you a bit of a 20,000-foot view. So we're going to explode all of the new certifications, and we've created a very useful chart that you can have on your desk, leave on your desk, to sort of let you know how far you are on your journey, and perhaps maybe also which particular track you may want to choose. We're also going to talk about, and some of you may already be halfway through your existing certification. So you've probably got questions about, I've done this course and this course, but, what can I do next? And am I going to receive any credit for my existing certifications that you have today? We're also going to talk about some useful links that we can share further information for you. And we're also going to touch on a little bit about DDLS Anywhere and how we're changing as a business and evolving, and what that means for learning in the future. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have a question and answer session for you then. So a little bit about DDLS, and you probably, most of you may be already aware of who we are, but just for those on the call that maybe don't and are new to us, we have been around for coming up to 30 years. We've got, we offered upwards of 700 different courses across 8 locations across Australia and Asia. And we have new offices open in other countries across Asia as we speak. As I mentioned, we have many different learning modalities, from direct face-to-face instructor-led training, a hybrid of the two, where we have some people come into the classroom and some people dial in remote. And we also have 100% virtual instructor-led training, where we broadcast our learning and students dial in from anywhere in the world where they are into our classrooms. And I mentioned before, we've been around for a very long time, over 30 years. So why change? Why have Cisco decided from February 24th of this year to change the certification stream, and why have they updated that? Well, the main reason being is they essentially wanted to, so I'm just going to move this a bit. they really wanted to, the key driver was that they wanted to change a cert so that they become more job role specific. And this is not specific to Cisco either. I work across, I'm a portfolio manager, so I work across many different products and many different vendors. And I'm seeing this as a common theme across the board. So what we're finding is because, and Cisco is a particular, if you look at their the way that their product changing, you could argue that they're moving from essentially a hardware company to more in line being a software company, and they're finding that the role of that, you know, the traditional network engineer is changing, and it's now encompassing a lot more software and also in the developer space. So the other thing they wanted to do is they wanted to remove the hurdles, or some of the hurdles, and allow students to fast track their education journey. So rather than saying you have to start from point A and then go all the way through to point Z, they're saying you can now essentially just jump straight in to where you need to be. And they're removing what I guess some may have considered in the past unnecessary steps towards your final destination. So rather than doing training and education that perhaps maybe you may not use in the future, they're making it a lot more laser focus in its execution. So the new CCNA, the big change is essentially it's now just one course. So it used to be, back in the old days, it was ICND 1 and ICND 2. Which was 10 days of training, 5 days of training each. They've now condensed that. Now, don't get me wrong, it is still 5 days. It is 5 days of instructor-led training in the classroom, but you need to also be aware that it is 3 days of self-study as well. So what Cisco have done is they've essentially boot camped, if you will, what Cisco, the new CCNA, ICND 1, ICND 2, they have chopped out some content, but on the other side, they've also added some content, which is part of that 3 days of self-study. The labs for CCNA will be available, so any student who comes in and sits a course with DDLS will have those CCNA labs available for 3 months after your course, first day of your course. And the one exam that they're now using is the 200-301. And as usual, one thing they haven't changed, Cisco have said, is your certification is still valid for 3 years, which is, that's remained consistent for as long as I can remember. So as mentioned, you know, condensing 10 days worth of content training into 5 days means some content won't be covered. So students will need to complete, as I mentioned, that further 3 days of training of self-study before we are being ready for the exam. We may, DDLS, because this is very, very new, we need to get a couple of runs under our belt. We may be offering some sort of package in the future to hopefully assist students in that journey as well. The CCNP, you know, cutting the CCNA in half has certainly expedited the journey. Now with CCNP, previously to get your CCNP, you needed to sit up to 5 courses, ICND 1 and 2, route switch and T-shirts. So they've removed the need for that. Now, essentially, to do your CCNP, you just have to do your NCORE course, which is a core, which I'll touch on a little bit further in the presentation, and then one particular specialist certification. So, you know, now that the other thing Cisco have done is they've removed the requirement to have a valid CCNA before you sit your CCNP. So this is a big point. You no longer need to have a valid or update or current CCNA before you go and sit your CCNP course and certification stream. The difference is, though, of course, that you do need to have the appropriate industry knowledge beforehand. So, you know, if you've got, you know, if you've been playing around with routing and switching for, you know, a few months or a few years, then you may have those prerequisite skills. But I would suggest perusing the course content that's covered in CCNA and just make sure that you're well versed in that, because there is a high level of assumed knowledge that you will need to do before you go and sit your CCNP, being your NCORE. All students, as mentioned, have to sit that NCORE, and that's kind of the gateway to wherever you decide to choose to go into your CCNP from there. But everyone, whoever's, no matter which particular certification stream that you're heading down, you will all need to do your NCORE course. And of course, like CCNA, it is also valid for 3 years. The different certification streams, you probably see some of these, the naming convention has remained the same. Some of them have changed. The old CCNP routing and switching is now called Enterprise. And the reason that is because they've now integrated a number of different other products, a number of new products into that certification stream, and also wireless. So there used to be a routing, a switching, and a wireless. The two of those have now converged and are now simply called Enterprise. Collaboration, again, for those old schoolers, is essentially the old voice and now integrating video and telepresence products. Data center is essentially Cisco's UCS and their Blade servers and a number of other products. Security, again, pretty self-explanatory with products such as ICE, which is their identity services engine, and a number of those. And of course, the old service provider, which is the SPNG route, advanced route, and a number of other products. And that service provider product is more limited to telcos and large enterprise customers. And the new certification stream that they've tacked on at the end is the DevNet, which is, as I mentioned earlier, that's now as Cisco moves away from physical infrastructure products and moves into software. They're opening up a whole new certification stream that talks about in the developer space as well. Now, if we look at the exploded view, you'll see, to sort of simplify what this is going to look like and how that will actually change, you'll see at the very bottom, you have your CCNA 200-301 course and your exam. Cisco obviously is now just called CCNA version 1.0, which is a little bit confusing if you talk about the old terminology, but essentially this is just the just that one course and that one exam. You'll then move on to what I guess if you look at the teal color there, which is on the left, is called core exam. So what this means is, before you go on and before you decide to choose what your specialization will be, all learners will have to go and do the relevant core exam. So if you were sitting the CCNP Enterprise, which is the very left-hand column there, I'm not sure whether you can see that. If you're sitting that, you have to go and sit your NCORE, which is implementing and operating Cisco Enterprise Core Networks, and then you would go on and do a specialist. So if you're looking at wireless, you would probably do ENWSLI, which is implementing Cisco Enterprise Wireless Networks. If you're going to be doing routing, which, you know, again, for the old school people is the old route course, you would do ENARSI, which is the Enterprise Advanced Routing and Services. If you're looking at doing something a bit more software focus, which is the SD-WAN or software defined WAN, you would do the SD-WAN 300. And that SD product is, I guess, an example of where Cisco are moving from physical to software based. If you're looking at the security products, there are a number of different products that sit within that silo. SSVIPS is essentially their firepower product, which is part of an acquisition they did a number of years ago. SVPN is pretty self-explanatory. If you're running a VPN and wanting to set up your VPN, if you're looking at using their identity services engine, then you're probably going to sit down and do the SISE, SISE. And then we move across to service provider, which I won't touch on a lot because it's not overly popular. The next one would be around collaboration. So if you're looking at wanting to do your application side of it, then you'd look at the CLICA, which is your implementing collaboration applications. If you're looking at your just general programming, then you would look at your CLAUI. And then we move across to the data center. Now, one thing I will note about data center is, and one of the biggest changes I've noticed with the new certification streams, is that with data center, although there's sort of the 5 courses that sit within the certification stream, the data center courses do have what I would call a very long tail, in that although there's 5 that sit in the certification stream, there's probably at least that number again, and then some that sit as what we call a product course. Now, what do I mean by a product course? So there's 2 types of courses with Cisco. There's a Cisco certification course, which gives you, is a certification focused course. It has an exam associated with it. You can go and sit the exam and you can verify your skills to the industry or potential employers. A product course is a course that is focused specifically on one particular product. So if I use, for example, if I go back to SICE, you'll see that although it talks about implementing Identity Services Engine, it's worthy noting that certification courses are only updated every 3 years. So if you're running and you're in charge of your cybersecurity for your organization, you may want to do the SICE course, but just note that it may be running an older version. If you're wanting to do something that's literally just been released as a product, it's version 5 that only got released 2 months ago, and let's say we're 2 years down the track, you might want to go and do the product-based course instead of the certification course. But generally we find that most of the certification courses are broad in their nature, whereas the product courses are very laser focused and specific on that particular product and up to date with that latest version that's available. And there's usually about a sort of a 3-month, with say a product course, there'd be a 3-month delay of here's the product that's just been released and here's the associated product course, whereas certification can talk about, sometimes the products they talk about can be 2 or 3 years, over 2 years old. And then on the side, right-hand side, you'll see the busiest part of the slide is the DevNet. And again, you'll see that it's very busy and there's quite a lot of courses that come down that right-hand side. We're not seeing a huge amount of interest on that side at the moment, but that doesn't mean that won't pick up. And some of the products that talk about, Cisco talks in there is maybe there. Again, you would do your dev core, and then you would do your app DNA and a few other products from there. Now, I will say that this certification chart will be available on our website. It's being made available. If not, it's already there. Please feel free to download it, stick it on your desk, and distribute it as much as you would like. Now, the other question I want to answer here is, for some of those who might be on the call might say, oh, look, I started my journey, I've been doing Cisco for many years, and I started doing my CCNA data center or CCNP data center, and I've got 2 or 3 certs at the moment. What sort of credit does that mean for my current journey? So am I going to receive credit for my current certifications, and what does that mean for the overall journey? So I'm just going to switch you across to sorry, stop playing ball. Now, Michelle, can you see my my web browser? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, I can.
Awesome. Okay, so this is the for those that are on the call, this is for the migration tool, and we'll use an example here. And we'll say, okay, let's say I've started my CCNP data center. By the way, these links are available in this slide, and if you're not sure, I'll show you, just Google in these exact terms on the next slide, and you can see where it's available. So if you just type in CCNP migration tool, and this is the first one that comes up. And if you scroll down here, it's a very basic tool, but it's also, I would say, its beauty is in its simplicity. So let's say that I did my DCII, I would click on that, and then I did my DCID, and then DCIT, and this obviously is dynamic and adjusts and says, right, so if I've done those 3 courses, I'll automatically receive my Cisco Certified Specialist in Data Center Design and my Cisco Certified Specialist in Operations. If, however, I want to go on and do my CCNP Data Center certification, which is the obviously the brand new ones that were released, you'll note that I will have to go and do the DC Core course and associated exam. Just to verify for you, you don't actually have to do the course before you sit the exam. You can have a go at the exam yourself, but of course, we recommend sitting the course and making yourself as knowledgeable as possible before you go and sit that exam. So, and you'll find here that there is a common theme across all of the particular certifications. So I've done SENS and I've done SIMOS. A lot of them you will get certifications, but you still will need to go and do the core version of each certification stream. So it's important that even though you may get credits, if you've done all 4, you'll be grandfathered in and you won't have to do core. But if, for example, if you're missing one, it'll say, actually, you know what, we want you to come and do the core. And that is, I guess, an example of how important these core gateway certifications are, is because they do cover a fairly broad amount of information, and which is why they're important that you actually start with that one first and then sort of move on to it. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this one. Get my slides. Now, hopefully you can see these more useful links. Michelle, if you just want to give me a nod, you can see that.
Yep, I can see it.
Awesome. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you is the what they call Cisco Certification Next Level. So this is a really useful tool, and let's see if it opens up. And this one here, essentially what it does is it shows you, or it condenses all of the new certification information. And this is kind of a very good start page. Talks about a little bit about why, you see down the bottom here, it says, across the ribbon here, it's got different certifications, what the benefits are, what the associated exams are going to be, what your training need to be, and how you can recertify. And then it sort of separates in the various certifications all the way up from CCNA up to CCIE being at the top, but then talks a lot about the new DevNet streams as well, which have their various specializations, whether you're looking at security or development or associate. Then talks about the different benefits, obviously, of certifying. Talks about how to schedule your exam, and recertification on if you're looking to recertify, which, by the way, I want to also mention that it may not be already aware, but if you're on this, you have an existing certification today, what previously happened was, let's say you had a certification that was valid until it expired, and what they were used to saying is your certification expired after the new certification came in on February 23rd. Cisco have released an announcement a couple of days ago to say that if your certification was valid up until March the 20th, due to COVID-19 coronavirus, and your lack of ability to get into a certification centre to update your certification, Cisco have just updated that to say that you've now been extended and granted another 6-month grace period on your certification. So you no longer need to rush out and try and find an exam test centre. You've got another grace period, another 6 months. The other thing I want to talk about is, and this is also a really good document, this is called the Certification FAQ. Pretty long document. It answers a lot of different questions. I'd strongly suggest you jump in here if you've got a fairly broad question or even a very specific question. They talk about what happens with the old design certification, which have actually now left the same. Talks about the CCNA in a bit more focus, different streams, what you may have passed, what you haven't passed, and whatnot. And of course, the other one is ddls.com.au, which is our website. So I'm just trying to move this out of the way. And we always use, obviously you're probably pretty familiar with this, but one of the things that we strongly suggest is jump on the certification page. Hopefully my fantastic team are already onto this and they've even updated the cert page. Hopefully it's there. If it's not, it'll be there very, very shortly. I think I won't go into it. It's probably still being updated. And so, as I mentioned, you can download that. And if you do need that, please reach out to myself or DDLS or your account manager, and we'll send you a copy of that certification stream for you. Just going to go back to this. Okay. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was DDLS Anywhere. You would have seen a number of businesses changing and adapting over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And, you know, I guess fortunately for DDLS, we've been in training for many, many years. And one of those reasons we've been in training for so long is we've constantly evolved our business to offer different modalities and different ways of consuming your training. One of the things that we implemented about 6 years ago was a new system called DDLS Anywhere, which allowed students in many different, a number of different options to be able to consume their training. So you can, as it stands today, and as per the current legislation by stage 2 restrictions, is you can actually come in and you can physically attend training with DDLS in any one of our 8 different locations around the world. So you can still have what we call the typical face-to-face training. If, however, your company has implemented travel restrictions, and for example, they maybe don't want you leaving your company site, they maybe don't want anyone actually coming into your site. So let's say, for argument's sake, you'd like to run a private training class inside your organisation, but you're not sure if your company will let you, we can actually broadcast that training. So the other 2 modalities we can offer is not only can you come in and deliver training and sit in our classroom, you can actually deliver it, you can sit at your desk, or you can even sit at home and actually dial into our classrooms and still get the full digital immersive experience that you would get coming into the classroom. But you've got that in a much more safer, coronavirus-friendly environment where you don't have to leave the comfort and safety of your own home. The difference between DDLS and I guess and some other companies that are now offering is we've been doing this for 6 years. So we're very well versed, we're very across it. We know the little, I guess, nuances of how to do it and how to do it well. And we also know that from our perspective, that there's going to be, you know, different challenges that presents, and we're also very good at addressing those challenges. So if you do have a training requirement, please don't think that you're going to be limited by coming into the classroom. We do have a number of different options for you available. And with that, I will open it up to any questions and answers. And please feel free, what I'd like, and I'd love to have this as a collaborative session. If you've got any questions in there that you'd like to add, please chuck them into the chat bar, and I'll do our best to answer them. So I'll hand it across to you, Michelle.
Thanks for that, Michael. Okay, so I'll have a look at the questions, see if any have come through. Okay, we've got one here. So our first question is, where can we get a copy of the certification chart?
Fantastic. Okay, so that will, as I mentioned, if you go to our website and you click on, in the top bar it says certification, it's either going to be there or be very close. So it was literally being added this morning. Let me just see if it's here. Or maybe wait 24 hours before you jump on that. But we'll certainly make that available on our website. Alternatively, feel free to reach out to your account manager, and they'll be happy to chase me up and send that across to you ASAP.
Okay, excellent. And we've got another question here. How much is a CCNA V1.0 exam?
Okay. So the exam, previously there used to be, as I mentioned, 2 exams because you did ICNA 1 and 2, but the new CCNA exam is $325 US, which if I work out to our exchange rate today is probably about 6,000 Australian dollars because our exchange rate's pretty terrible. But no, it's $325 US, and that actually gives you your CCNA version 1.0. You can sit those courses at Pearson VUE test centres. At the moment, I think they're changing those test centres because a lot of them and some of them actually are changing and adapting their testing centres to fit in line with the 4 square metre rule around social distancing. But from that perspective, I think they may potentially, again, I could be speaking out of turn, but what we've seen from a couple of our vendors of late is they've opened up their training to online proctoring. So Cisco may potentially be considering doing that if, look, if this coronavirus goes on for an extended period of time, Cisco may have to consider that as an option. But I can say that there are other vendors that have reacted very quickly to the crisis we're in at the moment and have moved all of their training, also all of their certifications across to online learning.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Michael. I've got another question here. With the CCNA courses, do they cover all subjects?
So what it actually did, you could also argue, is because there is, you know, back when CCNA first came around, it was kind of a, I guess, a gateway. Let's call it, CCNA was the gateway drug, and it would talk a lot about routing and switching and you know, and the avenues from that. But back then it was just CCNA, which is ICNA 1 and 2, and then you did your route switch 2 shoot. Now, as you can see, with 6 different certification streams, there's a lot of content, and the width of knowledge now is quite wide. So what you'll find is probably the lion's share of the content in CCNA will talk about, you know, Cisco's traditional business, you know, the routing and switching and whatnot, but then it also touches on the various different streams. So, you know, they talk a little bit about software development in Python. They talk a little bit about, you know, wireless topologies. They talk a little bit about, tiny bit about security. But essentially what they're saying is, regardless of which track you do decide to go in, they still recommend that you start your journey at CCNA and then sort of move from there. Although, as I mentioned, they've removed those barriers to go on and do CCNP. So if you want to, if you really wanted to, you can actually now just go and do one of the specialist courses. But if you want your certification, you'd still need to go and do the prerequisite for that, which is the NCORE course, and then you'd have your CCNP without having to do your CCNA. But what I strongly suggest to do is, and because the knowledge gap between a lot of different students is going to be quite wide, I'd highly suggest you jump on the on our website, jump on the, sorry, I'll just open it for you, the CCNA, have a look at the course outline. Is it going? Yeah. Have a look at the course. This is still on certification, sorry, just bear with me. Search. Have a look at the search, the course outline, and you'll be able to see just how broad it actually, the content talks about. So I'll scroll down here. So it talks about, you know, you look at your traditional stuff, you've got IPv6, you've got routing, you've got simple networking, TCP/IP. Again, this is pretty sort of basic foundational routing things. Talks about LANs and delivery process. But I would say that the CCNA is still very heavily weighted towards the traditional routing and switching content from that. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Michael. We've got another question here. I recently finished my ICND1 and ICN2 CCNA bundle courses through DDLS, but didn't sit my CCNA cert exam by the cutoff in February. What options do I have moving forward to get an equivalent certification?
That's a difficult one, and this is something that I guess we're being led by Cisco on this one. The cutoff was, unfortunately, to sit your old CCNA was actually, in fact, February 24th. We were hoping that Cisco would extend this date. They've extended existing certifications, as mentioned earlier. However, you might be a little bit out of luck there, because Cisco have said that drop dead date was actually February 24th. Perhaps whoever that caller is, can you get them to reach out to me personally? And what we can maybe do, because one of the things I've been asked of our instructors is I'd like them to run the new CCNA course and explain to me the delta difference between the old CCNA and the new CCNA, and maybe we can provide some links on missing content from the two. I don't think the old I don't think it'll be a huge gap between the old ICNA 1 and 2 versus the new CCNA, but there will definitely be a knowledge space between where your knowledge is today and versus. So I'd ask that person to reach out to your account manager, reach out to training@ddls.com.au. Say you attended the seminar. We'll have you, obviously, you probably got an account manager, and we'll try and find out from an instructor, because we've got a couple of instructors that have run the new CCNA, exactly what the difference in knowledge would be, and maybe we can work on a strategy there.
Thanks, Michael. We've got one last question. Is DNA talked about in CCNA, and what insecurity is covered?
Look, I would say that, if you look at the particular topics, so was it DA, was it design? What was it? Can you just repeat the question?
DNA. So is DNA talked about in the CCNA, and what insecurity is covered?
Yes, I would say the app DNA stuff is not covered in any great detail in the CCNA, and if it is, you'll find that it's very brief. So if you're after DNA training, I would suggest specifically, probably one of the more either specific specialist courses, or perhaps maybe one of those product courses that we were talking about before, which doesn't necessarily have a cert attached to it, but is more DNA focused. We're seeing a little bit of interest in DNA, but we haven't seen a huge amount of interest. But again, please reach out to your to training@DDLS or your account manager, and we'll try and figure out which course is best for you. And as far as security, again, not a huge amount. It talks about your traditional TCP/IP, troubleshooting, and evolution of intelligent networks, and that talks a little bit about software-defined networking and whatnot, but not really a huge amount of security. You'll see here in the self-study content down at the very bottom, they talk about examining the security threat landscape. So really, this is probably more about looking at what the security landscape encompasses, rather than specifically how to secure your own environment. Again, I would say I'd probably suggest you go and do your CCNA, and then go on and do your security focused or S-Core, and then look at how you want to focus from there. It all depends on your environment, whether you're running firepower, whether you're running ICE, or whether you're running even some of the old ASA stuff. So I would suggest you would probably, if you're after security specific stuff, then either jump straight into S-Core, or if you're not comfortable, do your CCNA first and then go down that path.
Great, thanks, Michael. Now, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Oh, actually, we've got one more.
Great.
Do I have to do the CCNA before a core exam?
No. So the Cisco have removed that prerequisite. For many, many years, it was a prerequisite. You had to go and definitely do your CCNA before you go and do your CCNP. They've now removed that entirely. So if you feel your knowledge is up to scratch, then we would suggest you jump straight into one of those core courses, depending upon which certification stream you wanted to choose. But yeah, to answer your question, short answer is you no longer have to do your CCNA anymore. It's just jump straight in. And that sort of harks back to what we were saying before about Cisco wanting to remove any roadblocks or extending your education journey unnecessarily. If you feel you've got the knowledge and you're comfortable with it, fast track yourself straight to one of the core courses.
Okay, we have time for another question. So in addition to that question, is that with enterprise and then security?
It's with all of them. So you no longer need, because if you remember back, if those have been around for a few years, you remember there used to be, first there was CCNA, and then they had the CCNP tracks, and then they decided to split out the CCNA into CCNA data center, CCNA data routing and switching, and then you do your tracks. They've actually completely gotten rid of all of that now. So you can go in, again, if you feel you're proficient and your knowledge is up to scratch, you can just go straight into, say, the DevNet core without doing any CCNA, or you can go straight in and do the security core or the enterprise core or the collaboration core. If you feel your knowledge is up to par, you no longer need to go and do your CCNA beforehand.
Okay. Got a few more minutes for the extra question. So example, do the enterprise core and then security extra?
Yeah, I would suggest if you're looking, depending upon your job role, if your job role is just, I'm the cybersecurity manager, I just do security, then you might want to consider just the, S core, which let me just open up the search chart and I'll go back to it. Just bear with me.
So another example that was used here, Michael, was, so for example, the DNA and the SDWNA.
So again, I'm not overly familiar with the DNA stuff. We haven't done a huge amount of training in that, so I wouldn't want to comment too much. But to answer, just to get back to that first question around your enterprise core and your security core, depending upon what you're looking to do, if you're, for example, you're looking after the network and a component of your role is to also secure the network, then I would suggest you go and do enterprise core and security core or S core. But if you're only looking to do, if your only role is just to look after the security, then you might want to look at doing S core and then specializing in that particular stream. So can you just reread that very last question, just so I can understand it?
Okay, so give me a second.
Now looking for DNA and...
Yeah, so for example, DNA and SDWNA, as well as VPN.
Right. Yeah, so again, those courses that, the DNA, I think they're product-based courses. So I don't believe that they're, so they're not certification courses. They're product-based courses, and you would need to go and do those specific courses. Again, just to reiterate, certification courses usually have a 3-year shelf life, and the information in them, when they talk about technologies, is more talking about topologies and generally broad terms. But if you're deploying a particular version in your network of AppDNA and you need to train on that particular version, then we would suggest going and doing those courses that you recommended before. For the sake of this argument, this is around certification streams. But again, if you're wanting something more specific, I'd suggest you go down those path of those product courses.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I believe that's all we have time for today, which brings us to the conclusion of today's session. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar, and thank you to Michael for that great presentation.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Last thing I'd say, please stay safe and look after yourselves.
Thanks, guys.